right behind listening and the skill of listening is the ability to be able to tell a story that results in a sale. Story selling may be the second most important skill set that you will develop if you're going to be a good sales rep. So let's talk about that. There are stories that tell and there are stories that sell. They share the same components, they share the same elements, they share the same things. We'll talk about the difference between them in the next video. In this video, we want to focus on the story itself, the value of the story itself. But I also want to remind you that there are also stories that make you want to run and hide. I listen to people sometimes tell a story and it's like, oh my goodness, is this ever going to end? So, the art of telling a story, a powerful story, a meaningful story, a story that bridges a gap, the story that accomplishes your purpose in the selling situation is important. And I see people all the time who try to do this whole rapport building thing. And I had a guy here in Huntsville who had a sailfish on the back of his wall. He loved to deep sea fish. And he had a sailfish on the back of his wall. He had to take it down because every person who walked into his office to sell wanted to start by talking about that sailfish on the wall. He got tired of talking about the sailfish on the wall. Actually was decreasing his ability to fall in love with that sport because it was a story that made him want to run and hide. Let's make sure we don't do that. So why are stories so important? Why do stories sell? What is it about stories that makes them special? Let's take a look at this. Number one, our brains are wired for stories. A couple of weeks ago, my 3-year-old grandson was here, and I was going to take him on a little trip, and we were going to drive around the country for a little while, and he's 3. So I take him up Montesano Mountain. We get halfway up the mountain. He goes, Papa, we need to stop and take a walk on the mountain. Okay, what are we going to do on our walk on the mountain? And he begins to tell me a story. We're going to look for Alabama monkeys. Not just monkeys, but Alabama monkeys in his little 3-year-old brain. He wanted to make sure Papa understood that it was Alabama monkeys that we were looking for. And he said, but we might not find monkeys because I think the mountain lions ate them all. And the reason why they have mountain lions is because you don't have enough T-Rexes in Alabama to chase off the mountain lions. So the monkeys can't grow. Now, that's an incredible story coming out of a 3-year-old brain. But it reminded me of something very important here, and that is that our brains are wired for stories, either to receive them or to tell them. We from the very, very little age, like his 3-year-old brain is spitting out this gigantic imaginary story about Alabama monkeys and mountain lions and T-Rex and all the stuff that's associated with that. Our brains are wired for stories. We want to hear them. Second thing is that a story has a natural progression. You know that when you're in the middle of a story, it's going to have an end, and hopefully that end has a point to it. And so people will stay with you, and they will listen, and they will pay attention because you're making a natural progression. Number 3, stories are a performance and not a presentation. So in a selling situation, it takes you out of that presentation mode and gets you into that relational mode and that conversation and that performance of your acting out the story, because stories have a huge impact, and you want to maximize that impact. And if you're going to maximize that impact, then you're not just standing there reading a story. You're actually telling the story that's meaningful. I've sat and listened to speakers who are having to read their story, and I'm not buying it for a minute because they're reading it. It doesn't need to be read. It needs to be told. We don't read stories. We tell them. And we're designed to tell stories. And stories are a bridge. They take people from where they're at to where you want them to go. And the story is the thing that opens up the windows, lets the light pour in. It illuminates what you're trying to accomplish. And so stories become that bridge. So let's talk about the keys to a great story, because there's some key elements to a great story. Number 1, the pace. You got to make sure that the story is told at a pace that engages the listener, so that they're following along with you, so that they're hanging on your next words, so they can't wait to hear what you're going to say next. So you make the pace so that it goes at a pace that people are engaged with. I've listened to people tell stories, and it's like, are you ever going to get to the point? That's a story that makes me want to run and hide, not a story that I'm eager to listen to. So pace is a key to a great story. Number two, has to have some essential elements in it, but it only has to have the essential elements in it. And we'll talk about the elements that are necessary in order to make it believable in just a minute, but oftentimes people include details that have no meaning, no purpose, nothing to do with the purpose of the story. So stick to the essential elements. A good story has only the essential elements in it. Number three, has something that captures people's attention. And it's not enough just to say that there were pretty lights. Describe how those lights glistened, or what it looked like, or the reflection that it made, or something to that effect. And so you want to use things that get people's attention so they connect and they draw that picture in their brain. Number four, stories need to have drama. And in order for them to have drama, you'll have some facial expressions that go with that. That's the reason why eye contact is so important, is so that people can see the expression on your face. Or gestures, not meaningless gestures, not flapping your arms and doing all kinds of stuff like that, but gestures that actually draw people in to the story that you're telling, that help enhance the drama, that build the drama of the story. And so those are keys to a great story. Now, what makes that story believable? Number one, if you put a date on it. My grandson was here 2 weeks ago. It's a date. That's a time. It's easy to verify that. You take a look at my Facebook profile, you discover I have pictures of my grandson from that time period. So it adds a level of believability to the story. So the date is very important. You could say like Thursday, or 3 weeks ago on Thursday, or in 1997, or it was Halloween in the 90s. You're starting to give dates to that hangs it in a place and time. A story, if it's going to be believable, has got to hang in a place and time. Number two, has to have a location. I was taking my grandson up Montesano Mountain. That's a location. It's a place. If I start a story and I say, let's suppose that I was at the bank. Now, I haven't given you a day. I started with a suppose, so I'm not going to believe it anyhow. And a bank. Well, how many banks are there? There's lots of banks. But if I say on Thursday I was at the Regions Bank, and then you're going to pay attention to, and you're going to believe me because you know that I could be at the Regions Bank on Thursday, and it makes it believable. So a date, a location. Number three, the third element of a believable story is put names in it. If I say that Tom and I were at Regions Bank on Thursday, or Tom and I did a power hour at the Catalyst on March the 11th, then you know that you've got verifiable things that you can prove the story with. And it's easy to to have people believe the story if you put elements in it that are easy to verify. Number four is that it has to be true. Make sure the story is true. You can't add these elements to a fictitious story and make it believable. But you can make sure that your story has these elements in it, and then that makes it more believable, okay? And then have verifiable details. Those are things that people can check out. Something that's verifiable, something that there's some detail associated with that. I was telling a story one time about the Chrysler minivan, and a woman walked up out of the crowd and said, my dad was the chief engineer on the Chrysler minivan project. Now, I gave enough detail in it to make it completely verifiable. Adds a level of credibility to your story. So, date, location, names, it has to be true, and you have to have verifiable details that are included in it. Here's the reasons why you want to tell good stories. All right, the benefits to a good story. Number one, it gives context to your business. If I'm talking about something that is conceptual, like when I used to be an insurance trainer, I would tell people to come up with real stories. Find people who had real stories. Find people who had things that would make it easy for you to tell that story and make it believable. Give it context to your business. People can't just grasp a concept. They've got to see it in the life of a person. Instead of saying 15,000 people suffer from this problem, describe Jack who has this problem. And give the detail about the problem, and then say, and not only Jack, but an additional 15,000 people have that same issue. Now you've given context to the business. Number 2, it adds an emotional element to the offer. If I'm using a person's name, if I'm talking about a time, if I'm referring to a location, if I have all those believable elements that are there, then I grasp that person gets a hold of what I'm trying to talk about, and it adds that emotional element to the offer. I can empathize with Jack. I can feel what he's feeling. And so I have that emotional element. People buy for emotional reasons. If you fail to engage the emotion, then you fail to engage the person, and they won't make a decision. All the facts in the world won't change their mind until you trigger their emotions. And then finally, it creates transparency. If you're telling a believable story, it creates transparency to your business. It makes you real. It makes you believable. It makes you somebody that people want to do business with. And so those are the benefits of telling a great story. In the next videos, we're going to talk about those elements and how to make that story go from just a story to a story that sells, and all of the other things that are associated with that.